students to Vietnam with me most summers. So I'm very wrapped up into the war in Vietnam. It is my scholarship in addition to it being my experience. In the war, I served as an infantry platoon leader and as what we call a mobile advisory team leader very late in the war. I was there in 70 and 71. That's 50 years ago now, but it's, as you will see as I talk about the war, it's very late in the war itself. So that's what I will be talking about for the next couple of weeks is the war in Vietnam. What you just listened to was a song called Fortunate Son by Creedence Clearwater Revival, CCR. Generally speaking, we say that Hollywood has produced so many movies about Vietnam, and the music of Vietnam is very interesting. And so I'm going to be playing that some of that music for you over the next few lectures. Fortunate Son's one of the most famous. There's also a song called Gimme Shelter by the Rolling Stones. I'll play that for you later. And then there's also a song called All Along the Watchtower by Jimi Hendrix, who was an Army soldier. He was a soldier. He did not serve in Vietnam, but he was in the Army. So those are the kind of things that we're going to talk about in the next few weeks. We don't know exactly why this is the case, but the war in Vietnam, or the American war in Vietnam, which I have gotten used to saying because I teach this course also in Vietnam sometimes, we generally say that the Vietnam War is the most popular history class we teach at Texas Tech. I teach it every other year, and we have between 100 and 150 students every year. I could teach it every year and still have 100 students. At Texas Tech, it's more popular than the courses on the Civil War. It just depends on where you are, I guess, but it's a very popular course here at Texas Tech. And we ask, why is it so popular? Why is the war in Vietnam so popular? And the best answer I can ever come up with is it's about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And that's about a very simple answer, I guess, but it's sort of accurate in that this is a rock and roll war. There are a lot of bad things that happen in this war. There's a lot of, I won't argue anything good, but I will argue that it is important. So here we go. On this first screen, I have several points that I'm going to be talking about today. The first point is about what we say I call orthodox and revisionist schools. And here's what I mean by that. Scholars of the Vietnam War are broken up into what we call two different schools, the orthodox and the revisionists. That is, those of us that study this war. And I'll define it this way. The orthodox school says that Vietnam was the wrong war, at the wrong place, at the wrong time. America should not have been in Vietnam. And in fact, America lost the war in Vietnam, the first war America ever lost. And I would hope to say the only war America ever lost, in that we do not yet know the outcome of your generation's wars, the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan. But we do know that until those wars started, Vietnam was known as America's longest war. And you can decide when it starts by the lectures that I will be giving. Some will argue it starts in about 1954. Some will argue that it starts in about 1965. I'll leave that for you to think about. You might even see that on an examination or something. The revisionist school are historians who believe that the war in Vietnam was proper. It was legitimate. It was just. It's just that the soldiers did the best job that they could in that war, but that the politicians in Washington, D.C. lost the war for America, not the soldiers on the ground. Some of the revisionists would even argue that we didn't lose the war in Vietnam, we just went home. And when we went home, those that we left in place, our allies, the South Vietnamese, who you will learn more about today, they lost the war in Vietnam, not the Americans. Those are the orthodox and the revisionists. I will argue that I am neither an orthodox nor a revisionist scholar of the Vietnam War. I will argue that I am what we like to think of as a post-revisionist scholar. By that, I mean, I will stipulate either that we shouldn't have been there or that we should have been there. I will stipulate either one of those things, but I will tell you this, that we were there. And so to argue whether we should have been or shouldn't have been 50 years later makes no sense to me. We were there. And I will argue that the things that I have studied, the books that I have written about Vietnam, take a post-revisionist attitude that there is a lot to learn about Vietnam, whether we should have been there or shouldn't have been there. So that's the category I put myself in. So today, in order for you to understand all of the things that happen for this long war, you need to know the history of how America got involved. And that's what I'm going to be able to talk about today. The French Indochina War. So, as I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, I think I talked about Ho Chi Minh as the leader of the Viet Minh and that they had helped find downed American pilots. And in the process of finding those pilots, they became close to some Americans that were on the ground trying to help. And we know that President Truman made a decision, a big decision, to let the French back into Vietnam. What do I mean back? The French actually showed up in Vietnam in 1856. They actually brought military units into Vietnam in 1856 to essentially conquer Vietnam. Now, I will argue also that they had been there for a long time before 1856. French missionaries came to Vietnam back in the 1600s, 1700s to try to convert the Buddhists of Vietnam, which is about 90% of the country. They tried to convert those Buddhists to Catholicism. They actually even changed the alphabet of Vietnam to away from a Chinese-based alphabet to a Roman-based alphabet. They didn't change the language itself, but the Vietnamese language is very what we call tonal. It's monosyllabic, meaning that every single word in Vietnamese is only one syllable. I even go so far as to pronounce the word of the country, which a lot of Americans pronounce as Vietnam because it's spelled V-I-E-T, and we would say Viet, and that's two syllables. But the Vietnamese pronounce their name of their country Vietnam because they don't have two syllables in Viet. They say Viet. So I will argue that Vietnam, the Vietnam, is a country with a language that is unique to certainly the Pacific theater, to the Asian theater, but I would also argue that it's unique in the world in that it's monosyllabic and that it is very tonal. I was fluent in Vietnamese, when I came home from the war. I was there as an advisor, so I spoke the language. Um, I spoke a very strong military language of Vietnam. When I came back to America, we were starting to get a lot of Vietnamese refugees, as you will learn in my lectures, and a lot of them became owners of stores and became owners of 7-Eleven stores and things like that. And I used to joke that my language skills were so good that I could go in and order things, but I wasn't as good about ordering bread as I was calling in airstrikes. And you don't normally need to call in an airstrike on a 7-Eleven. So my language skills were somewhat were fluent in terms of military language. When I went back to Vietnam in 2012, I was very honored to become a Fulbright scholar to Vietnam, and I spoke and I taught there for 6 months. And before I went back not the second time, but when I went back on my Fulbright, I studied for about a year to get my language skills back. And so right now I'm not exactly, I wouldn't call myself fluent. I'm probably intermediate, and I can order in, when I go back, I can order in restaurants, and I can do some of those kinds of things. But my point here is that it's a unique language. Now, after World War II, and with the French having been there for 100 years, but gone for the period of time of World War II, because the Japanese controlled Vietnam during World War II. During that period of time, the French were not there, obviously, but at Potsdam and in discussions afterwards, Harry Truman allows the French to come back into Vietnam. And Ho Chi Minh will write a letter to President Truman, and he will say, hey, what's the deal here? Why aren't you giving us our independence the way you gave independence to the Philippines? So I have here Viet Minh and French Far East Expeditionary Force. We're going to talk a little bit about Dien Bien Phu, and we're going to talk about getting the French out of Vietnam after they're having been there for almost 100 years. So here's the map. And as I told you the other day, this is Vietnam. It's this really skinny little country with this tremendous coastline all along here. And you can see here the cities. There's about 4 big cities. You can see down here the city of Saigon, which now has a name called Ho Chi Minh City, because when the Communist Party takes over Vietnam in 1975, when that happens, what we'll see happen is that they change the name of the city. Bottom line, very, very skinny country. At its skinniest, across here, it's about 70 miles wide. It's about 1,100 miles long. And it borders Cambodia down in here. It borders Laos right here. So this map is actually of 1947, and the French control Vietnam. The French control all of these areas of Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos. They don't control Thailand, but they do control that. Now I have on the screen a picture of some very important people that you need to know. This guy right here in the middle, his name is Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh. This guy right here His name is General Giap, G-I-A-P. This is a planning session for how Ho Chi Minh and General Giap and their Viet Minh soldiers are going to attack the main headquarters of the French. This takes place in 1954. In 1954, the war against the French, when Harry Truman and the world allowed the French to come back into Vietnam after having been out during World War II, the French will invade Vietnam again in 1947. They will invade them at a place, let me see if I can get my map back here. They'll invade them at a place up here called Da Nang. It's a coastal city called Da Nang. The reason that's important is because in 1856, it's the same place that the French had invaded Vietnam way back in 1856. And then almost 100 years later, they're going to do it again in 1947. And interestingly, when the United States invades Vietnam in 1965, we're going to do it at the same place. Da Nang is the name of that place. So in this planning here at Dien Bien Phu, which is the headquarters of the French military, the plan is that the Ho Chi Minh soldiers under Ho Chi Minh are going to, in one night, they will start firing artillery shells down on the garrison of the French. And in the first 15 minutes of that battle, the French will lose virtually every single field grade officer and higher. 15 minutes. We're talking about thousands of Viet Minh who are the communist guerrillas fighting for Ho Chi Minh. They will destroy the artillery bases. Now, the battle will go on for about another 6 to 8 weeks. In fact, it'll get so bad that the Vietnamese who are fighting alongside of the French, and there are Vietnamese government people fighting alongside of the French, will actually call in an airborne strike. And you can see in this picture, you'll see a whole bunch of supplies and Vietnamese jumping to save the French soldiers. Many of these men that jump into this battlefield had never jumped out of an airplane before. They were making their first, not even training jump. Hell, it was their first combat jump, and it was had never even trained. Bottom line of this battle at Dien Bien Phu is that the French will be defeated in this battle after having fought the Viet Minh for about 7 years, from 47 to 1954. And the world is shocked that this band of small guerrillas, so to speak, will be successful in being able to get rid of one of the Western powers of military powers. And here's you see some of the French being hauled off as prisoners of war. Here's a picture. I actually took this picture up at the top of the mountain of Dien Bien Phu, giving credit to the giving credit to the Viet Minh who freed the Vietnamese people from French rule. Now, what was going on about the same time as the Battle of Dien Bien Phu was going on? There was a conference that had been pre-planned in Geneva, Switzerland, to talk about a lot of the issues of the world. And at that meeting were United States representatives, along with a lot of the rest of the world there. And it was a shock, a complete shock, that the French had been defeated by these Viet Minh. So the decision was made. Ho Chi Minh, of course, had won this battle. He had defeated the French, and he assumed that meant independence for his country. But instead, there was a negotiation that went on, and the decision of this group that included the Soviet Union and that did not include China, who of course is just to the north, did not include China. But the decision was, let's divide Vietnam into two countries. Two countries. We'll divide it at the 17th parallel. The country to the north will be called the Democratic Republic of Vietnam. Makes no sense because it's a communist country. And it will be led by Ho Chi Minh. The country to the south will be a free country, democratic, so to speak, and it will be called the Republic of Vietnam. Two countries. And then the decision was, in 1956, 2 years later, there will be an election governed by the United Nations, governed by outsiders, so to speak. And at that election, the decision will be made to unite the countries or not, and that the election will be to either to unite and to make Vietnam an independent nation. Well, I'll give you a spoiler alert on this. That election will never take place. Never take place. We didn't have Gallup polls of that part of the country back then, but if there'd been a Gallup poll taken, it was pretty obvious that if such an election would have taken place, Ho Chi Minh in the north and the communists would have won that election. So the United States influenced it from ever happening. So there was no election to unite the countries. So I'm going to be talking about three eras, basically, in this series of lections. I'm going to be talking about what I call the first advisory period, and I'll be talking about the last advisory period in a few weeks. And in the middle, I will be talking about the United States war in Vietnam, or what I usually call the era of big battles. But today, for now, I want to talk about the first advisory period. I'm going to put a patch up here. It's called MAG, and that stands for Military Assistance Advisory Group Vietnam. Military Assistance Advisory Group Vietnam. Now, we sent advisors to Vietnam right after 1954. The idea being that in this period of time, we would help our allies in South Vietnam, Free Vietnam. We would help them fight these communists from the north. So the plan was that we would initially we sent about 400 advisors into Vietnam. And they were all senior military people, and senior officers, that is field grade officers, I'll call them, lieutenant colonels and majors. And then we also sent in senior NCOs, senior sergeants. And these were the men, they were professional soldiers. And their job was to train the Vietnamese to fight. During that period of time, and here's a picture of some Green Berets. The idea was that these indigenous forces, people who lived there, would fight alongside a few American officers and non-commissioned officers who would train them to fight, and that they would take on the communists in the North. That at least was the plan. Well, I think before I go too much further here, let me run through a couple of slides, and so that you will understand who all these people are. Just a second here. Let's talk about the belligerents. And I have a picture up, or I have some words up here of who the belligerents are. You can just write them down. The Democratic Republic of Vietnam. This is their flag. Now, this is still the flag of the Socialist Republic of Vietnam, because the Socialist Republic of Vietnam ends up being the winners in this war, and they kept their own flag. This is the flag of the National Liberation Front. The National Liberation Front. They are communists. You may have heard them referred to as Viet Cong, Viet Cong, VC, or as sometimes when they were kicking your butt, we called them Charlie, or Mr. Charles if they were kicking your butt. These were the guerrilla fighters in South Vietnam whose job was to take down the existing democratically elected government of South Vietnam. That flag is this flag, the flag of the Republic of Vietnam. Now, this flag, yellow and red, is a flag that flew over all of the installations of the government when I was fighting in the war there. When I was giving this lecture in Vietnam during my Fulbright years, I did the same thing I'm doing with you folks. I put these flags up here, and I put this flag up here, and everybody said, that's our flag. And then I put this flag up, and they kind of don't, it's okay, because these guys fought alongside the communists. These are communists. And then I put this flag up, and everybody gave a great big gasp and said, take that down. That's illegal. You can't fly that flag here. Well, I at least wanted to leave it up a little bit, and then I put this flag up, and everybody cheered. I don't understand why everybody cheered, because it was the United States of America that brought great havoc and great destruction to Vietnam in 1965 and later. So let me talk a little bit about a man by the name of Ngo Dinh Diem. Now, it's important that you write these names down. That name that I put up before of a place where we fought, where the French fought the Viet Minh is called Dien Bien Phu. Okay, so write that name down. Dien Bien Phu, DINHBIENPHU. I had a screen of that up there. But this guy is a person. His name is Ngo Dinh Diem. Ngo Dinh Diem. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Vietnamese language and proper nouns. The Vietnamese put the last name first and the first name last. So my name in Vietnam would be Milam Ron, okay? So this guy, Ngo Dinh Diem, his first name is Diem, D-I-E-M, and his family name is Ngo, N-G-O. Okay? So I'm going to talk a lot about him today. See, I got a picture of him. There he is. Diem and Ike. 1954, he is the leader of Vietnam. Now, we will argue that Diem is our guy. I will also argue that he wasn't exactly loved by us, but he was truly anti-communist. And in those days, based on what I told you in the Cold War lecture of last week, in those days, if you were anti-communist, you were our friend. That's all we cared about, is that you were anti-communist. Ngo Dinh Diem, however, was a unique kind of a guy. He was anti-communist, he was Vietnamese, but he also had spent a lot of time in America. He was Catholic. He was Catholic in a country that was 90% Buddhist. And he was going to lead this country. Now imagine that you've got a guy that's Catholic leading a country of almost all Buddhists. Now the problem with him was that he was a little bit of a tyrant. I don't know if we can call him just a bad guy. I think that would be a little bit strong in language to call him a bad guy, but he was not a very effective leader. And the reason he wasn't a very effective leader is that he believed that all power should be invested in the leadership of the country, and he sort of forgot about the villages. He forgot about the hamlets. He forgot about the peasants, forgot about the agricultural areas of a country that was almost all agriculture, the rice growers. He didn't think they were very important. And as a result of that, there came about a real, should I call it a real opposition to Ngo Dinh Diem, led by these Viet Cong. Diem is in power from 1954-55 to 1963. In this period of time, people grow to hate him. The people in South Vietnam hate him because he's a bad leader. The people in North Vietnam, the communists, hate him because he's anti-communist. It becomes so bad that he takes it out on the Buddhist religion. Now, because the country's 90% Buddhist, there are monasteries around the country where monks go to learn to be Buddhist leaders. Those Buddhist leaders, Ngo Dinh Diem takes it out on them, meaning that he believes they're part of the communist movement. So when Buddha's birthday happens and they fly the flags of the Buddhists, he orders the flags to come down. He continues this idea that the Buddhists are bad people in a country that's 90% Buddhist. Now you're probably thinking, well, why would a guy do that? Well, he was Catholic, and he may have had a goal that that people could be converted to Catholicism. I mean, that's obviously what happened during the French period. French had 100 years to try to do it, and they were unsuccessful. But Ngo Dinh Diem believes that that's the way that it could be, that his government could be successful by putting down this Buddhist religion movement. Now, I'm going to put a screenshot up that's going to bother some of you, but I have to do it in order to have you understand what's going on. 1962. This is a picture of a man by the name of Thich Quang Duc. Thich Quang Duc. Write his name down, please. you'll see him sitting here on fire. Immolation. Now, normally we say self-immolation, meaning you burn yourself. Bottom line is, you'll see a car parked behind him. He was driven from a monastery in one of the northern cities of Hue, which you will hear more about later. He was driven from his monastery to Saigon, and he asked his fellow monks to pour gasoline on him and to set him on fire. You see the gasoline can sitting there. And he did this in protest of what No Dinh Diem was doing to the Buddhist religion in his country. I put this picture up there because when I go to Vietnam each summer, I take students with me, 10 students every summer, and we go to the monastery where Thich Quang Duc was, where he was from, where he studied from, and that's the car he was driven there in, and that car is at the monastery, and all my students like to take pictures of themselves in front of that car. Bottom line is, this picture is shown around the world, and it's sort of like, my goodness, why is this happening, and what's going on in that country called Vietnam? 1962. 1962. Well, No Dinh Diem was a bachelor. He was single. But his brother's name was No Dinh Nhu, N-H-U. Let me see if I can go back up and put his name up there. Yeah, you see this guy, brother-in-law, No Dinh Nhu. Excuse me, his name, that slide is incorrect. No Dinh Nhu was the brother of No Dinh Diem, okay? No Dinh Nhu was the brother of No Dinh Diem, and he was the minister of security. That was his job. Well, No Dinh Nhu, his brother, No Dinh Diem's brother, was married to Madame Nhu. I mean, obviously her name was something else, but in Vietnam, you take on the title of your husband. So my wife's name would be Madame Ron. Her name was Madame Nhu, but I put up here a phrase called Dragon Lady. She was one tough lady. Bottom line is, she was married to, she would have been the sister-in-law of No Dinh Diem. And she made a comment about the immolation, the burning of Thich Quang Duc, by saying that she made the comment that this was just another Buddhist barbecue, a Buddhist barbecue. And she did not feel sorry for any of the Buddhists that were taking part in these kinds of things. Well, let's take it to the first week of November of 1963. I say that because if I give you actual dates, they will confuse you somewhat. So we'll call it the first week of November of 1963. The reason I think it's important that we do it that way is because there is almost exactly a 12-hour time zone difference between Vietnam and Lubbock, Texas. So right now in Vietnam, it is 4 o'clock in the morning on Friday. And so when I talk about dates, they get confusing because are you talking about American dates or or Vietnam dates? But we'll call this the first week of November. Her husband and No Dinh Diem, the brother, America has had about enough of these guys. Even though there are guys, and we put them in power, sort of. And because these guys are representing democracy in the country, but it's not the kind of democracy we want, we start thinking that No Din Siem is a bad leader, and we hear that some of his own military are thinking of staging a coup d'etat, to take him out of power. So the United States of America probably, and I'll use the word probably, allows it to happen. President Kennedy, who is in office now, and I'll talk about him in a minute, President Kennedy actually knew No Din Siem when President Kennedy was a senator. Some members probably of his cabinet come to President Kennedy and say, Mr. President, we've got a real problem in Vietnam. We think we should get rid of Siem. We hear there may be a coup. We should support that coup, or at least not keep it from happening. And President Kennedy says, fine, but that's about all he says. And the assumption is that somehow or other, No Din Siem will be removed from power, and the United States will actually fly an airplane, or the plans are to fly an airplane into Saigon, the capital, and put No Din Siem on that airplane and his brother and maybe his wife, Madame Yu, and fly them to the Philippines for safe harbor. At least that's what we think President Kennedy thinks is going to happen. Well, it's not exactly what happens, so get ready for this picture. Instead, No Din Siem and his brother No Din Nhu are put into an armored personnel carrier, telling them they're going to take them to safe harbor, and they drive them out a few miles. They open up the back, and some of the soldiers put about 33 bullets in each of them. The assassination of No Din Siem. You can't see the picture of his brother, but he's laying right next to him, and they're both dead from bullet holes blown in them by their own military leader, by their own military. How about that? So let me tell you about the Americans that are involved in all of this. You know, of course, that Dwight David Eisenhower from my last lecture is elected President of the United States in 1960 and takes office in January of 1960. Let me back up. He is elected president in 1952, takes office in January of 1953. So he is the leader for the period of time that I have been talking about up to 1960. In 1960, we elect a new president. This guy, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, had been a U.S. senator, had been a Navy officer, a junior officer. He becomes president of the United States. And in his inaugural address, in addition to saying to the world and to Americans specifically, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. But in addition to that, and that's what most Americans think about, he also makes a plea that if you are living in the villages of the world, and he uses the word villages, and you are, and you have been taken over by those that do not like freedom, and I'm paraphrasing, you have the United States of America to help you. And he goes into great specificity about America always being there for the downtrodden of the world who are seeking freedom. I can tell you that a lot of American boys, maybe including myself, as one of those, would have looked at that and said, that's my guy. I think I want to go to the villages of the world and help people. We were motivated to help the world. He will start an organization called the Peace Corps. He will start an organization called Special Forces, the Green Berets. We're going to fight wars differently. And all that stuff that Ike was doing with nuclear weapons and new nuclear weapons and all of those things that we were doing were going to be done not by John Fitzgerald Kennedy. He was going to change our thinking about helping the peoples of the world that were being taken over by communists, for one thing, and Vietnam was certainly that from his perspective. He was our leader. He was the guy that we wanted to follow. And of course, you know the rest of that story. November 22nd, 1963. And I'll give you that exact date because it happens in our own state of Dallas, Texas, when Lee Harvey Oswald will fire shots that will kill John Fitzgerald Kennedy and wound the man sitting next to him, or in front of him, Governor Connolly. And of course, the new president is this guy, Lyndon Baines Johnson from San Marcos, Texas. The vice president of the United States becomes the president. And this is a picture of him taking the oath of office on Air Force One, standing next to the former First Lady with blood on her jacket. And it will be Lyndon Baines Johnson who will have to pick up the pieces from President John Kennedy and essentially handle the war in Vietnam, which will become known as Lyndon Johnson's War, because it will be Lyndon Johnson who will send American troops into Vietnam in about a year and a half from now. And with that, I'm going to open it up to questions from you.
I have one.
Emily.
So you said the Vietnam at its skinniest was 70 miles wide. How long was it? Was it 111 miles?
About 1,100 miles.
1,100.
Yeah, it's really long. It depends on whether you measure it from the very tip or where you measure it from the islands and how far north you go, but it's really, really long. Now, having said that, I want you to put this into your mind. The square mileage of the country, if we take it from top to bottom and width and everything, the square mileage makes it almost exactly the same size as the state of New Mexico. Okay? The population of Vietnam in 1965, when America is involved in the war, the population of this country that's the size of New Mexico, the population is 28 million. Now, the population of this country that's the same size as New Mexico is 95 million. It will be next year. No, let's see. I think they said by 2025, Vietnam will be within the top 20 largest countries of the world. And yet it's the size of New Mexico. That's not a square, obviously. What else can I answer? I know I covered a lot of material very quickly. Who we got here?
Byron.
Byron, sir.
I'm curious about the place you mentioned where there was planned, the HQ of French, where they planned the attack, and also where the troops invaded. You said Da Nang, was it?
Well, it's Da Nang where the invasion takes place.
That's where the invasion takes place?
Yeah, that's where they come on shore. It's also where they came on shore in 1856, and you spell that D-A, and then the second word is Nang, Da Nang, and capital N-A-N-G, and that's where the Americans will come on board, and we'll probably get the Americans on board a week from, let's say it won't be a week from today because you don't have class. The next time we lecture, I will bring the Americans in big time.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Who else?
I have a question.
Kathy.
I know you're going to talk about this later, but the three eras, the first was the advisory period, or first advisory period, and then the U.S. war in Vietnam. What was the third?
The second advisory period. Yeah, it comes at the end. That was my period. Okay, that was my experience, is that I came in when almost all the American troops had gone home. I was there when I was there in, I'll put a map up on the next time that'll show you 4 different areas. I was sort of in the middle of what we call the Central Highlands, the mountainous areas. And the 4th Infantry Division, one of the largest divisions, had just gone home when I got there. So there were no Americans left when I got there, other than advisors.
Thank you.
Yes.
I have a question.
Carissa.
Who were the revisionists again?
Who are the revisionists?
Yes.
They are historians who believe that America should have been in Vietnam, and in order to stop communism. And the fact that we failed to do that was not the military's fault. It was the fault of politicians in Washington not allowing us to fight the war we wanted to fight, okay? And I'll be talking about this almost in every lecture that I do about Vietnam. And their argument is that we as soldiers, and you may hear this from your grandpa or somebody that you know that served there, you will hear people say, we had to fight our war with one hand tied behind our back. That becomes sort of the argument that a lot of Vietnam veterans, still today, a lot of Vietnam veterans think that way. I don't. I probably thought that when I came home, but I don't think that now that I've studied it for the last 20 years.
Thank you.
Yep. Who else?
I just want to
Claire.
say something. Yes. Let's see. Who was the name of the general that spoke with the Dien Bien Phu again? What was his name?
At Dien Bien Phu, the general's name is Giap, and it's spelled G-I-A-P. And you will learn more about him later, because he will be the general that is he'll be the general that's generally given credit for defeating the Americans.
Okay. And first of all, I just want to personally thank you for the service you did in Vietnam.
Well, thank you for that. And, you know, you bring up an interesting point. I have a lot of veterans in my classes from Iraq and Afghanistan. And one of the saddest things I ever heard was a mother came up to me one time and said that she wanted to know from me, I was giving a lecture somewhere, and she wanted to know from me why her son, who had already served one tour in Iraq and was on his way to another tour, why every time someone comes up to him in an airport, sees him in uniform, why he always, and says, thank you for your service, why he always rolls his eyes. And that concerns me. And I said to this mother, I said, yeah. And I said, you won't ever see a Vietnam veteran do that, because nobody thanked us for our service when we came home. So I appreciate you saying that, Claire. Thank you. Anyone else?
Yes, sir.
Taylor.
Yes, sir. So, on the same subject of the revisionist, what were the Orthodox people again?
The Orthodox people are people who say it was the wrong war in the wrong place at the wrong time. That's the easiest way to think about it. Many of those scholars, and this is why they get I think they get a bad reputation. I don't want to be part of either one of these groups, but they get a bad reputation because a lot of them were part of the anti-war movement during the Vietnam War. And I will be talking at length about the Vietnam War anti-war movement. And a lot of these guys were, and because I'm going to talk a couple of days, I'll be talking about the soldiers in Vietnam. And you'll learn that the soldiers in Vietnam, a lot of us, most of us, were drafted. We didn't want to go. We didn't say, hey, send me. We were drafted. And these guys, a lot of them were anti-war activists, some of whom left America, gave up their citizenship, went to Canada. And so they came back, and a lot of them stayed in school, got degrees, became historians, started writing books about the Vietnam War. I don't hold anything against them, okay? Because as you will hear me talk later, I was a draft dodger myself until such time as I ran out of time, and then I ran out and I was a student, and then I had to go, and then I volunteered to become an officer. So, but there was a time when I said, hell no, I don't want to go either. So anyway, they were the ones that were sort of part of the anti-war movement in a lot of cases, and being able to write about it 10 years later when we lose the war is sort of an I told you so. And a lot of people criticize them for that. I just don't believe I'm either one of those things, orthodox or revisionist. I am a post-revisionist, and I say, okay, when you're done arguing about this, let's talk about what happened. And that's what I teach.
Thank you.
Anyone else? You, Taylor?
Sorry. One other thing, just to make sure I have it straight. So I can't pronounce his name. Ngo Dinh Diem.
No, Dinh Diem, yes.
So who is his brother? Or you talked about him, but I just want to make sure that
his brother's name was Ngo Dinh Nhu. He has the same first and middle name, and his first name, same last name. Ngo is the family name. Dinh is his middle name, and then Nhu, Nhu, is his first name. So Nhu and Diem are brothers, as Charlie and George would be.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else?
And I had one more question.
Yes.
On where was I at? Sorry. So whenever they divided Vietnam, what was Ho Chi's side called?
Ho Chi Minh's side. It was called the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, DRV, which is really weird because it was anything but democratic. And the South was called the Republic of Vietnam, and it wasn't much of a republic either. Both of those names are sort of made up. What you're going to find is the elections that were held, there'll be elections held down in South Vietnam, and the winner will get 110% of the vote. So they're both not really free the way we think of democracy ourselves, but the country of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, for your purposes in this course, I will say a lot of times I'll talk about North Vietnam and South Vietnam. And as long as you know that the North are the communists and the South are the allies of the United States, for your purposes in this class, that's good enough. Most of the VC, well, I can argue that almost all of the VC, the National Liberation Front, they're just fighting in the South. And they are a guerrilla organization that's fighting to support the communist country in the North. They're guerrilla fighters, okay? Whereas most of the soldiers from the North are going to be regular Army soldiers with uniforms and everything, whereas the guys in the South, and I'll show some pictures to you, guys in the South are going to be wearing black pajamas of the VC. I'm sure many of you have seen a lot of movies about Vietnam. And I will argue and I will suggest to you that some of them are okay and some of them are pretty bad. And I'll now and then make reference to them. And I think you can earn extra credit by watching some of them actually. And so if you do watch those movies, and I have a movie form that's in the syllabus, it's to what you ought to be saying. What I would hope you do is that you watch those movies and then you take what you see and compare it to my lectures. And you can tell me then whether Hollywood's getting it right or not, or maybe I'm wrong. Who knows?
Like the Black Pajamas, I always think of the Phil Ox song, I'm Not Marching Anymore.
That's a great song. I have a whole album of Vietnam War protest songs and a whole album of just Vietnam War songs. In fact, and I'm not suggesting any of you do this unless you go to the library and borrow it, but I wrote a book, or I edited a book called The Vietnam War in Popular Culture. And it's 790 pages long, and it's about movies and music, basically movies and music and literature and novels and all those things of the Vietnam War era, those that took place during the war and those that took place after the war. And I think our library has it. I don't want you to buy it because it's like $180 or some crazy number, but it's a pretty interesting thing. And a lot of my colleagues and a lot of my friends wrote essays in it. So anyway, yeah.
That's awesome.
Anybody else?
Yes, sir. It's me again.
Okay, Taylor, go right ahead.
Where was that place that the conference took place in Switzerland again?
Geneva. A lot of conferences, United Nations conferences, take place in Geneva, and that's where it was. It's known as the Geneva Conference. And since I've only got, how many have I got on here? I've got 70 of you, 69 of you now. So I'll give you all a hint that will help you on your exam, and nobody will know about it except you guys that stayed with me. You'll probably see not an extra credit, you'll probably see a multiple choice question that'll come up about Geneva. And the question is, Geneva was, and I argue, a qualified success for the United States. And the reason I say qualified is because the United States made it happen that the country would be divided into two pieces. But as a result of that, we ended up fighting a war where 58,279 people were killed. So I call it a qualified success or something like that. I forget what answer it is, but that's the answer. So don't tell anybody except for you guys. Anything else? Well, thank you for staying with me. On Tuesday of next week, you will be having your book discussion with Nathan and Morgan and Sarah. And you're reading a book called Last Night I Dreamed of Peace. And the book will bother a lot of you. It's written by a woman who we killed. We Americans killed her. And you'll read in the preface that she was killed by the Americal Division, and she was a doctor. And this is her diary. And American soldiers found the diary on her body. And one of the men that found it came to Lubbock, came to Texas Tech for one of our conferences and gave it to us. And we ended up finding the family of that woman that was killed. Dang Thuy Tram is her name. So you won't enjoy reading the book, but it's an important book. It's really an important book. And if you've never read about the experiences of a woman in combat, this is a woman in combat on the enemy side. So I will be sending questions out for that this weekend, I believe, and you'll be able to talk to Morgan and Sarah about that. Morgan and Sarah and Nathan. And in the case of Sarah, as your TA, Sarah actually worked in the archive where we house that book. Anything else from anybody? I will say also to those of you that are still with me, the 67 of you now, congratulations to my teaching assistants, Morgan Hargrave and Nathan Davis, who passed their comprehensive examinations in history, and they are both prepared now, their writtens and their orals. They are now prepared to walk and become holders of the master's degree in history in May, and I'm very proud of both of them. All right. I hope you all have a great weekend, a good Easter weekend. I think you're off school Monday, actually. And so you enjoy that day off. And then you will not see me again for quite a while, because next week is your book discussion on Tuesday. And then on Thursday, we don't have class. And I will be sending you a list of opportunities for Friday and Saturday for you to earn extra credit. By all you have to do is turn on your computer like this and link up and listen to some people talk about Vietnam. Some people from Vietnam in some cases. They're from all over the world. Some of them here in Lubbock, Texas. Some of them are my students. And it's going to be a great conference. So I will tell you how to earn points in doing that if you don't want to watch movies. Okay? Y'all have a good one.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you,
Thank you.
Professor.
Thank you, Professor.